She walked out with the calm efficiency of someone stepping into a rideshare, not leaving behind 13 years of marriage. No shouting, no crying. Just two pre-packed bags and a final look over her shoulder. "I think we've outgrown each other," she said, tone neutral, almost bored. Like we were a pair of sneakers that lost their arch support. I remember my fingers still damp from the sprinkler settings. I just reprogrammed them for the new water schedule. It was one of those mild spring Saturdays where everything smells like citrus and fresh-cut grass. Her timing was surgical. 2 days later, her Instagram went public. First post, some rooftop bistro downtown. Wine glass raised, shoulder pressed into a man's chest. Her smile overly curated. The caption was the part that hit. "Finally with someone who understands drive." Hashtag corporate power couple. His name, I found out later, was Mark. Her work husband. You know the term. Harmless inside jokes. He just gets me. Monday lunch meetings that somehow stretch into post-work cocktails. I'd seen his name before in passing. Never thought much of it. Now, his LinkedIn practically became her new Bible. Every conversation with our friends turned into a TED Talk about Mark's vision and how corporate excellence requires sacrifice. She'd say things like, "Ray was always content building something small. Mark, he thinks globally." She stopped calling our life a partnership and started calling it a phase. I didn't yell, didn't plead, didn't even ask why. I just stopped watering the backyard 2 days later. It felt unnecessary, like feeding a dog that already ran off to the neighbor. And hey, if you're still listening, most of you aren't even subscribed. But it helps us keep doing what we're doing. So if you're into stories like this, you know where the button is. Anyway, I started noticing the real betrayal wasn't just about leaving. It was the rewrite. She didn't exit gracefully. She revised the narrative. Overnight, I went from husband to crutch. I found out she told her friends I lacked ambition, that I had a small mind. Imagine being called that by someone whose idea of risk was switching shampoos. The irony? She had never once asked how I got our mortgage rate so low, or why our taxes were always clean, or why her credit limit magically increased every year. She just assumed the paperwork handled itself. Mark, though? Mark was flashy. Slick suits, loud voice, perfect LinkedIn ratios. He once posted a selfie on a company jet with the caption, "Private, because public is for passengers." She ate it up. She moved into his apartment downtown, a high-rise with glass walls and 0 books. The type of place where every surface is marble, but the fridge is empty. They started showing up together at networking events, rubbing elbows with people who said things like synergy and scale. I knew because a few mutual acquaintances sent me screenshots, unsure if I'd seen. I didn't reply. One friend messaged, "You okay?" I typed, "Never been better." Then deleted it. Typed, "Hope she's happy." Deleted that too. What I wanted to say was, watch. Just watch. Because I wasn't angry. Not really. I was taking inventory. Not of feelings. Of facts. Because you can lose a person. But if you stay very, very quiet, you can see what else they were standing in front of. What they were trying to block your view from. And once they step aside, the full picture comes into focus. And in that new clarity, I noticed something strange about Mark's company. The one she wouldn't shut up about. Rinwald and Chase. Not a startup. Not a tech firm. A legacy consulting group. Old money. Serious contracts. The kind of place with mahogany doors and 4 layers of non-competes. I only recognized the name because, years ago, I'd consulted briefly for one of their shell subsidiaries when they were restructuring. A favor, really. Barely billed it. They paid in shares of some dormant holding company. I never cashed them in. Just archived the folder with my old LLC's tax returns and forgot about it. Until that hashtag corporate power couple, reminded me. And then, I started digging. Not emotionally. Strategically. A week later, she texted like she was RSVPing to a potluck. No apology. No self-awareness. Just, Mark and I were thinking, it might be good to get dinner. Clear the air. No tension. Just mature closure. Closure? She hadn't even closed the bedroom drawer before sprinting into someone else's sheets. But now she wanted to play enlightened? To smile across a table while sipping red wine and pretending we were all adults who just drifted? I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have words, but because every version of a reply felt beneath me. You don't swat a fly when it lands on your plate. You just get a new plate. That Friday night, my phone buzzed with 4 photos. No context. Just snapshots. First, a dimly lit steakhouse, candles flickering off wine glasses and designer flatware. Second, her manicured hand across the table, resting on his. Mark's Rolex front and center like a trophy. Third, Valet ticket with the logo of some high-end lounge embossed in gold. Fourth, the back of his luxury sedan, her heels kicked off, her legs tucked under her like she'd finally arrived. It was supposed to sting. And for a second, maybe it did. Not because I missed her, but because I realized she'd always mistaken style for substance. She was showing off the wrapping paper of a life, mistaking it for the gift. I looked at those photos like a forensic analyst. No ring on her finger. No trace of the person who used to spend Sunday mornings in sweatpants, eating leftover lasagna cold from the fridge. She'd erased it all, deleted the memories, and replaced them with table reservations and filtered smiles. But while she was sipping imported wine, I was sifting through something else entirely, our mortgage folders. You'd be surprised what people forget when they leave. Titles, signatures, old operating agreements. I had a cabinet full of paperwork she probably thought had disappeared into the digital ether. But I don't digitize everything. Some things I still trust to paper, especially leverage. I found our original co-investment file from the duplex we flipped in 2016. A file she signed without reading, back when she said, "Just handle the details, Ray. You're good at that stuff." And I was. Still am. The document had a peculiar clause. One I'd inserted at the suggestion of a client who'd been burned by his ex, something about reciprocal forfeiture of equity rights in cases of undisclosed cohabitation during property holding. It had sounded obscure at the time, a weird hypothetical, but I kept it. And now, she was flaunting a new cohabitation arrangement on social media while technically still tied to two joint properties, one of which I planned to refinance. The other, listed for sale behind her back. She didn't even notice the MLS listing had gone up because her email account had been set to forward to a folder she never checked. I wasn't hiding anything, just not waving flags. I also logged into the old Dropbox folder we used for tax season. She hadn't updated her password in 3 years. In it, joint statements, employment contracts, and her entire resume, right down to the fake community development initiative she claimed to lead. It was a blog with 3 posts, all written in one night. I kept a straight face as I reviewed it all. No rage. No bitterness. This wasn't vengeance. This was excavation. Beneath the surface of our civil separation, she'd handed me everything I needed. Not just leverage, narrative. And I was beginning to understand something she never did. When someone tries to humiliate you publicly, don't clap back. Don't post counter pictures. Don't call mutuals to clarify. Just wait. Because if you're patient and surgical, you don't have to respond at all. The fall writes itself. It was one of those quiet Thursday nights when the silence feels earned. No TV, no music, just the low hum of the fridge and the ticking of the wall clock I'd meant to replace for a year. I was scanning some old invoices, clearing out the last of the paper trail from the house I'd no longer call mine soon. Then my phone buzzed, unknown number. Normally I'd let it go, but something made me answer. "Mr. Dawson," the voice said, clipped, dry, unmistakably East Coast. "I need you in my office. Tomorrow morning. 10 sharp. No introduction. No company name. Just command." I held the phone between shoulder and cheek, still half glancing at an old electric bill from 19. "I think you might have the wrong." "I don't. This is Lawrence Hewitt." My fingers stopped moving. The name snapped me upright like a reflex. Lawrence Hewitt, CEO of Rinwald and Chase. Mark's boss. The top of the chain. I said nothing, processing. "Do not mention this call," he added. "To your ex-wife. Or her associate." There was a pause. Not long. Just enough for implication to settle in. "Can you be here tomorrow?" Sure. "But why?" I finally asked, already knowing I wasn't going to get a straight answer. "Because," he said, "you were listed. And it affects them both." Then he hung up. No address given. No details. Just a name and a time. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was anxious, but because I was curious. Razor curious. What could possibly connect me to this man, this company, and them? I typed the name into every directory I could access. Law journals, corporate leaks, board registries. Nothing useful. Hewitt was a ghost wrapped in bespoke suits. His company wasn't just wealthy. It was entwined with state contracts, real estate development, and hush-hush advisory boards. The kind of power that doesn't advertise itself. And I, somehow, had been listed. The word stuck with me. Not invited. Not requested. Listed. It implied prior knowledge. Like I'd been sitting in a file cabinet somewhere, waiting for a scenario to trigger my relevance. So I spent the rest of the night preparing, not physically, but mentally. I printed my old consulting invoice from the shell firm that had paid me in partial equity. I reread the clause about silent shareholder standing. At the time, It had sounded ceremonial, like getting a medal for a war you barely served in. But now, I wasn't so sure. At 9:52 the next morning, I pulled into the underground lot of the Rinwald and Chase headquarters. The building was all mirrored glass and stone confidence. No signs, just a subtle RNC etching in the corner window. Inside, the lobby was colder than I expected. Gray walls, tall ceilings, white light. Clinical, designed to make you feel both insignificant and watched. I gave my name to the woman at the front desk. She didn't even glance up, just typed something, nodded once, and handed me a guest badge with no color. Just my name and a single word at the bottom, restricted. Before I could ask anything, a security guard appeared. Tall, silent. He gestured to the side entrance, not the elevators the others were using. Mr. Hewitt's request, the woman said without looking up. The guard led me past a paneled wall that slid open without a sound. Inside, a private elevator. Stainless steel. No buttons. Just a keycard reader and a tiny display that read level R. I stepped in. The doors closed. And the elevator moved. Not up, not down. Just somewhere. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't rage, wasn't betrayal. It was anticipation. The sense that something bigger was unfolding. Something orchestrated. I wasn't at the edge of a mess anymore. I was being ushered into its center. And someone was finally ready to show me why. The elevator didn't ding. It whispered. One moment I was inside a mirrored capsule of brushed steel and chilled silence. And the next, the doors glided open. Not to a floor marked by cubicles and hustle, but to something older. Something quieter. The room was cathedral-like in its stillness. No music, no idle chatter. Just the soft murmur of filtered air and the faint buzz of fluorescent lighting hidden in recessed panels above. A long conference table stretched across a walnut floor that looked hand-polished. To the left, a wall of screens, some flickering with company dashboards, others blank. To the right, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled not with books, but binders. Hundreds of them, color-coded, unlabeled. And seated in the middle of it all, like a queen in a courtroom, was a woman in her early 60s. Silver hair twisted neatly back. No jewelry, no logo, just a navy blouse, dark slacks, and a look that didn't bother with pleasantries. She didn't rise right away. She studied me for a beat longer than was comfortable, then finally stood and extended her hand. My name is Eleanor Chase, she said. Founding partner. That name punched harder than the elevator ride. Not the CEO, not the board chair. The name, Chase, the second half of Rinwald and Chase. The name that was never spoken casually in articles or interviews. She wasn't just senior to Hewitt. She was the blueprint. She gestured to the seat across from her, and I sat without a word. I imagine you have questions, she said, but I'd prefer to begin with some answers. She tapped a screen beside her. One of the displays on the wall lit up. An employee roster. Faces. Roles. One of them, Mark. Below it, his access logs, his calendar entries, meeting notes. Then my ex-wife's name, tied to those same meetings. Not tagged as a guest. As a contributor. Mr. Dawson, she said, I'm not here because of you. I'm here because of what your ex-wife and her companion failed to see. She tapped again. A contract appeared. It looked familiar, but only in the way forgotten things do. My signature. My old LLC. And a series of inheritance agreements from a now-absorbed shell company Rinwald and Chase had acquired 5 years ago. I stared. That's mine. You currently own a 12% silent interest in Rinwald and Chase Consolidated Holdings. Through a dormant consultancy we acquired during our offshore restructuring. Your name was never removed. Because, she tilted her head slightly, you never cashed out. I swallowed. Hard. I didn't know it was still active. It is, she said flatly. And as a silent minority stakeholder, you're entitled to certain disclosures, which, unfortunately, have been violated. She turned the screen off and let the silence work on me. Your ex-wife, she continued, was invited to a strategy retreat under false credentials. Mark listed her as a compliance consultant. She signed an NDA she didn't understand, then participated in 4 sessions related to earnings forecasts, intellectual property, and potential merger discussions. I blinked. That's not possible. She took notes. Asked questions. They were recorded. She tapped another screen. Audio began to play. My ex-wife's voice. Confident. A little smug. But if the European partner doesn't extend the exclusivity window, she was saying, you'll have to dilute the conversion clause, right? Otherwise the stockholders will panic. Click. Eleanor folded her hands. She's smart. I muttered, more to myself than anyone. She's reckless, Eleanor corrected. And Mark is worse. He gave her access to internal files using his director credentials. It's all traceable. Logged. Dumb. I sat there, stunned, not just at the scope of it, but at how quickly the dynamic had flipped. I came here expecting veiled threats or polite damage control. Instead, I was being handed a detonator. So, Eleanor said, you can press charges. Or we can handle this, quietly. Why involve me? She smirked, barely. Because they thought you were irrelevant. And in this firm, irrelevance is the most dangerous illusion you can give the wrong person. She stood and walked to a smaller cabinet, pulled a thin file, and handed it to me. A joint board memorandum. Drafted. Dated. Mark. Suspended pending review. My ex-wife. Contract terminated for ethics violations under Clause 12B. You don't have to sign anything, she said. But we'd appreciate your presence. When they're informed. I looked at the file, then back at the wall of screens. Why? I asked. Why not just send them a letter? She tilted her head again, voice calm as a scalpel. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing in a room is the person they thought they already walked over. And in that moment, I understood something. This wasn't just about justice. It was about theater, power, position. And Eleanor Chase had just cast me in a scene they never even knew they'd rehearsed. The file Eleanor slid across the table was navy blue, unbranded, and thick. Not the kind of document folder used for decoration or dramatics. No embossed logo. Just function. She didn't dramatize the gesture, didn't pause for effect. She slid it like a dealer delivering a hand of cards that had already decided the game. I opened it. The first few pages were standard due diligence. Background checks, signature logs, login histories, audit trail snapshots. Mark's name came up a lot. Initials stamped next to restricted file access. Time-stamped right before and after meeting invites that included my ex-wife's email address. But the meat of it was halfway in. A contract. One I'd signed years ago. Old letterhead. My LLC's name across the top. Dawson Strategy Group. I hadn't seen that name in nearly a decade. At the time, it was just a flexible side hustle structure for consulting gigs when I needed to keep things clean for tax purposes. Rinwald and Chase had acquired a boutique firm I'd advised. Some obscure restructuring project related to offshore compliance. My payment was split, partial cash, partial deferred interest in their holding company. I never thought I'd see the equity mature, but I kept the paperwork, because I always do. Apparently, they did too. Clause 7.3, Eleanor said. Silent interest converts to proportional voting rights in any matter where the holder is materially affected by internal conduct breaches. I blinked. She flipped to another tab in the file. Highlighted text. Conflict of Interest Clause. Subclause 14. C. No partner, employee, or subsidiary contractor shall knowingly expose non-cleared individuals to forward-looking statements, M&A forecasts, or shareholder-sensitive information. Below it, someone had scrawled in pen, violation confirmed. See incidents hashtag 27-33. My ex-wife's name appeared in the annotations. 6 entries. One involving her commenting on a live call transcript related to a pending acquisition. Another, where she had apparently emailed a question from their vacation in Sonoma, asking Mark if they'd be rebalancing their European exposure based on the Q4 misfire. Mark had replied with a spreadsheet attachment, not even password protected. I looked up, trying to process what this meant, and Eleanor, calm as ever, simply folded her hands. They played house inside a vault, she said, and they left the door open. She didn't flinch. Would you prefer we press charges? I looked back down at the file, my own signature staring up at me like a ghost that had been waiting years to come alive. Or, she continued, would you like to handle this internally? I asked the only question I could manage. Why give me a choice? Because, she said, you're no longer just an observer. And this, she tapped the file, gives you standing. I leaned back in the chair. The air felt different now. Heavier. Like walking into a room you've been in before and realizing all the furniture's been shifted 2 inches to the left. They didn't just violate some vague policy. They breached a structure. My structure. Built years ago and left dormant, forgotten by everyone. Except the system that still held my name. I wasn't the man she'd left anymore. I wasn't the discarded husband, the dull safe bet with sprinklers and spreadsheets. I was something else now. I was a variable they never accounted for. A dormant clause brought back to life not through revenge, but through reckless arrogance. Eleanor rose. I'll need your answer by Monday. We already have the memo drafted. Suspension for Mr. Danning, effective immediately. Termination of contract with our subsidiary for Ms. Greer. All internal channels will be updated. I stood too. What happens if I say no? She smiled faintly. Then it proceeds without your endorsement. But it won't feel nearly as poetic. There it was. The truth under the surface. This wasn't about paperwork. This was about narrative. They had mocked me with their curated captions and strategic dinners. Now they would learn the consequence of stepping on someone who documents everything. I nodded. I'll be there. Eleanor walked me to the private elevator herself. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of the room. The screens, the binders, the chairs she hadn't offered them. And in that moment, I understood exactly what I had become. Not the ghost of a broken marriage. Not the man who got replaced. But the name in the file they never read. Eleanor didn't blink as she handed the memo to her assistant. The woman took it without a word, disappearing behind a paneled wall like she'd been trained in quiet exits. It was surreal. How quickly something as cold as paper could unmake two people who thought they were invincible. No shouting. No vengeance speech. Just a paragraph marked with legalese and consequence. Mark Danning. Suspended pending review of ethical breaches, specifically under clauses 14c and 17b. Lauren Greer. Termination of contract with immediate effect due to willful violation of proprietary information policies. They wouldn't even get the dignity of a face-to-face reprimand. No warning. No slow unravel. Just a calendar invite, a scheduled board session, and a line that would redraw their entire futures. I sat across from Eleanor again, feeling not victorious. Not yet, but no longer on the outside of the narrative. I wasn't a footnote. I was part of the rewrite. She turned to me, voice even, clipped, measured. I'd like you there. When we inform them. Why? Because they need to see what they missed. I raised an eyebrow. You mean me? She didn't confirm or deny. Just slid another paper across the table. It was a seating chart. Boardroom, 7A. Oval table. 13 chairs. Their names at the far end. Hers at the head. And mine. Closest to her right. Why put me there? Eleanor didn't look up. Because power needs proximity. It was so matter-of-fact, I couldn't help the small breath of a laugh that slipped out. You want this to be personal. She finally met my gaze. Mr. Dawson, everything worth remembering is personal. That night, I didn't go home. I checked into a mid-tier hotel on the edge of the business district. Nothing flashy. Neutral tones. Good Wi-Fi. I didn't want familiarity. I wanted distance. I sat on the edge of the bed, stared at the skyline, and thought about all the things I wouldn't have noticed if I'd reacted emotionally instead of strategically. If I'd yelled. If I'd demanded explanations. If I'd chased them. Instead, I waited. And now, they were walking right into a room they didn't know had already turned against them. The next morning, I was escorted into boardroom 7A by a silent assistant who didn't make eye contact. The room was colder than expected. Not in temperature, just energy. Tension hummed under the table like a buried wire. There were no windows. Just abstract art, a tray of untouched water pitchers, and an enormous LED screen dark as a void. I took my seat, second from the head, right where the chart had placed me, and waited. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Mark walked in first, confident stride, wearing a tailored suit that looked expensive but distracted. His tie wasn't centered. He didn't notice me at first. He was too busy shaking hands, smiling like he owned the place. Lauren, my ex-wife, followed. She saw me the second she entered, and froze. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle hitch in her step. Like her heel caught for a second, and her brain hadn't decided whether to keep walking or turn and sprint. She smiled anyway. Thin. Fake. Ray, she said softly, as if my presence could be explained away with familiarity. I didn't smile back. I just nodded once. She took her seat beside Mark, 2 chairs down from mine. He leaned in to whisper something in her ear, probably some inside joke, something about professionalism or optics. Then Eleanor walked in. The room stilled. She didn't say a word until she reached the head of the table, placed her leather-bound notes on the surface, and sat. One tap on the screen behind her, and the LED lit up with 2 words, compliance review. Mark's smile faded. Lauren shifted in her seat. Eleanor turned to me, her expression unreadable, and gave the smallest nod. Not for theatrics. Not for gratitude. Just acknowledgement. I'd spent weeks being dismissed, mocked, and redefined in stories I didn't approve. And now here I was, watching 2 people who thought they had rewritten the ending, slowly realize they hadn't read the fine print. The room dimmed. The memo was about to be read. And for the first time since she left, my ex-wife wasn't the one who held the narrative. She was sitting in it. Mark strutted into the boardroom like he was walking into a photo op confident, shoulders high, mouth curled in that practiced, effortless grin he must have rehearsed in bathroom mirrors and elevator reflections. He scanned the room like a man expecting applause, or at the very least, deference. Then his eyes landed on me, and he flinched. It was brief, but real. A split-second glitch in the performance. His grin twitched, just enough to betray recognition and confusion. The smile tried to reassert itself, but the swagger had been punctured. Lauren walked in seconds later. Her gaze scanned from Eleanor to the screen behind her, then to me. And that was when the air in the room shifted. You could almost hear it. The way she stopped breathing for just long enough to realize something was wrong. Her lips parted, as if to greet me. But no sound came. She didn't sit right away. She glanced at Mark. He didn't look back. Eleanor, still seated at the head of the table, didn't bother with small talk. No greetings. No introductions. She tapped the screen. The silence broke with the click of an audio log. A recorded conversation. My ex-wife's voice, asking about earnings projections, casually referencing a confidential presentation deck. Mark's voice followed, laughing, telling her, "It's fine. Nobody's watching this level of access." Then a calendar entry popped up. A strategy session, tagged internal only, held on a weekend in Sonoma. Participant list, 8 cleared executives, and Lauren. Her email circled in red. Another tap. More evidence. An Excel file with metadata tracing the download back to Mark's IP. Sent directly to her personal Gmail. The room didn't gasp. It was too corporate for that. Too practiced. But the stillness became suffocating. The kind of silence that eats oxygen and turns paper rustles into gunshots. Mark leaned forward, trying to recover. "I think there's been a miscommunication. Lauren was just observing. She didn't. She was not cleared," Eleanor said, flat. He kept going. "Right. But we had verbal permission, internal alignment that she could." "No one on this board," Eleanor said, voice like stone, "authorized any alignment with your girlfriend." Mark's jaw clenched. "With respect, this feels like a personal attack more than a policy breach." "It's neither," she said, already cueing the next slide. Email chains lit up on the screen. Dozens. Her name embedded in threads she had no legal access to. My name appearing at the bottom of the ownership registry. And then, just to make sure the knife went all the way in, the contract with my signature. The LLC. The equity clause. Clause 7.3 highlighted. "Mr. Dawson," Eleanor said, calmly turning to me, "was never informed of these breaches. He had standing to be notified. He was not. That alone is a violation of fiduciary obligation." Lauren finally found her voice. "This is insane," she whispered, looking directly at me. "You're doing this? You." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Her voice cracked like it always did when panic outpaced logic. "I was just," she began. Eleanor cut her off with one hand raised. Not a shout. Not a slam. Just a raised palm. And then the sentence that finished them. "You were pawns," she said, eyes like ice. He was the forgotten shareholder. Neither of them moved. Mark sat frozen, blinking like a man trying to recalculate everything at once. His future. His image. His exit strategy. Lauren turned pale. All the blood drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug behind her ears. I watched them both disassemble in real time. She tried to speak again. Something about intentions, mistakes, how she didn't mean to cross a line. But the words died under the weight of the evidence now lining the wall behind Eleanor. A digital firing squad. "You accessed information illegally," Eleanor continued. "You participated in discussions outside your role, outside your clearance, and in violation of our ethics code." She flipped one final document on the table. Mark's contract. Redlined. Lauren's agreement. Terminated. No recourse. No severance. Just done. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. I didn't say, "This is what betrayal costs." I just sat, as instructed, at the second seat from the head of the table, exactly where they'd never imagined I'd belong, and watched the lights in their eyes dim. Not because I punished them, because they did it to themselves, and I simply let the truth walk in behind them. The boardroom didn't clear like in the movies. No slamming doors, no dramatic exits. Mark and Lauren were escorted out quietly by a firm-faced assistant in a dark suit who didn't even use words. Just a gesture. Mark resisted at first, tried to stall, to mutter something about needing to clarify, but stopped the moment Eleanor said, "This isn't your meeting anymore." And just like that, they were gone. The door clicked shut behind them with an almost surgical precision. Eleanor didn't look up. She simply tapped her stylus against her notes, then nodded to the far end of the table. Let's proceed. I didn't recognize most of the board members. Older men in high-collar shirts, women with blunt-cut hair and muted jewelry, powerfully unremarkable in a way that screamed influence. They all had tablets open, documents preloaded, votes ready. No one was shocked. No one whispered. This had been prepared. The chairperson, a man named Drayton with a voice like gravel, read the motion aloud, dry as concrete. Motion 44B. Immediate suspension and removal of Mr. Mark Danning from his role as Senior Director of Strategy, with recommendation for permanent termination following audit review. He paused, looked around the table. All in favor. Every hand went up. Instantly. No debate. No dissent. Motion carried, Drayton said, tapping his screen. Then, as casually as if ordering lunch, he continued. Next item. Removal of Ms. Lauren Greer from the Global Initiatives Consultancy roster, with revocation of all contractor access and immediate notification to our subsidiary communications team. A woman near the window tapped her screen. It's already begun, she said. Website edits in progress. Bio removed. Credentials deactivated. Someone else added. PR team is standing by for reactive statements, should any leaks occur. They didn't even say her name again. Just moved through her undoing like she was a task to check off. As if she'd never existed on the payroll, never stood at Mark's side with that smug, corporate smooth confidence. Across the table, Eleanor turned toward me. Mr. Dawson, as a silent shareholder, you are entitled to observer rights during these sessions. Given your proximity to the matter, you may remain for the audit vote if you wish. I nodded once, said nothing. She slid a form across the table. A single page. It didn't require a signature to be legally binding, but it did require acknowledgement. I picked up the pen. The tip hovered for a moment, not because I was unsure, but because I realized what this moment was. It wasn't payback. It wasn't even revenge. It was the confirmation that quiet observation had more power than noise ever could. I signed. No flourish. No underline. Just ink on paper. And with that, the wheels turned without me. One board member mentioned a restructuring proposal to fill Mark's seat. Another brought up the ethics retraining schedule for all senior directors. Eleanor never looked at me again during the session. She didn't have to. The message had been delivered, publicly, professionally, and irrevocably. Lauren's name was gone from the internal portal by the time I checked my phone. Her LinkedIn had gone quiet. Mutuals had unfollowed her without fanfare. I imagined her scrolling in silence, watching it all recede like a tide pulling back from a beach she thought she'd conquered. They had broadcast their new life like it was a brand campaign. And now the collapse was even quieter than their debut. By the end of the hour, their names were spoken less and less. The final item on the agenda, a closed session to discuss shareholder engagement strategy. They offered me the option to join. I declined. I made my point. Not by shouting, not by gloating, by sitting still while my structure, handled what emotion never could. Outside, I walked through the lobby with the same guest badge they'd handed me that morning. No applause. No parade. Just the quiet satisfaction of a man no one thought mattered. Until his name was the only one that did. It was late, close to midnight, when my phone lit up with her name. No block number, no cryptic area code. Just Lauren, as bold as ever, like nothing had changed. I let it ring 4 times before answering. She didn't waste a second. We were building something, she hissed, voice shaky, trying and failing to sound composed. You ruined it. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching the steam rise from the kettle I'd forgotten to turn off. The house was dark except for the light above the stove, and the silence was almost orchestral. I replied calmly, I built something too. You just didn't see it. There was a pause on the other end, as if she didn't know how to argue with that. Like the words reached somewhere her logic couldn't shield anymore. She wasn't expecting me to sound indifferent, or whole, or tired in that final, resolved way that comes only after you've won the kind of war no one cheers for. You embarrassed us, she snapped. No, I said. You did that yourselves. I just invited a mirror to the table. I hung up before she could respond. The next morning, the quiet collapse began in earnest. Mark's car, a silver German luxury model he loved to post about, was gone by noon. Repossessed. It had been part of his corporate compensation package. He never read the fine print that said it would be revoked instantly upon suspension. The dealership's tow team didn't even give him time to clear out the glove box. I know this because a friend of mine who works in logistics forwarded me a photo. Mark standing on the curb, phone pressed to his ear, watching his status symbol disappear down the street like a stolen crown. That afternoon, the building manager at their downtown condo, leased through a Rinwald and Chase corporate partner, received the termination notice. Lauren had boasted about the amenity package just 2 weeks prior on Instagram. Rooftop pool, 24-hour concierge, private gym. Now she was on speakerphone, pleading for a transition period. Policy didn't allow it. Keys were deactivated by midnight. They had nowhere to go. Mark had burned too many bridges with friends he considered beneath him. Lauren hadn't kept her old apartment. She moved in with him the day after walking out of our house, remember? She ended up at her sister's place in the suburbs. 3 kids, 1 spare bedroom, and a roommate dynamic they'd barely survived in college. I didn't hear that directly, of course, but people talk. And when you fall that hard, the whispers don't ask permission. Mark bounced between 2 friends' couches. Word got around that he was looking for freelance work. Consulting, he called it. But in this city, once you're labeled a liability, even the freelance world stops answering. Their glossy corporate couple fantasy turned into a logistical problem overnight. The wine tasting stopped. The hashtag captions vanished. Her social feeds went dark. His profile, once plastered with photos of downtown rooftops and staged meetings, went private. They had built nothing. Not really. They mistook access for ownership, proximity for power. And when it all got stripped away, there was nothing underneath. No foundation. Just empty charm and borrowed privilege. That evening, I made dinner in silence. Roasted chicken, mashed sweet potatoes, a glass of red. Simple, grounding. The kind of meal people forget to appreciate when they're chasing high-rise validation. I thought about what Lauren had said. We were building something. She really believed that. Believed the dinners, the Instagram photos, the boardroom whispers meant legacy. That a rented view meant elevation. But a structure isn't built with selfies and steak dinners. It's built with silence. With leverage. With patience. I never made announcements. I never posted warnings. I didn't send threats or fight for closure. I just waited for the trap to close. And now? It had. Quietly. Completely. Irrevocably. While they unraveled, I sat in peace, with both hands still on the blueprint. 3 weeks passed. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just enough time for the dust to settle, quietly, as it always does after a controlled demolition. The city kept moving. Deals kept closing. And somewhere in the midst of it all, Mark and Lauren were reduced to nothing more than a lesson. I hadn't spoken to either of them since the call. Didn't need to. Their names surfaced occasionally, always spoken softer now, in the kind of tones reserved for warning stories and boardroom anecdotes that begin with, "You remember what happened to those two, right?" It was a Wednesday morning when the message arrived. A simple email from Eleanor's assistant. Subject, request for presence. Inside, a date, a time, and 1 line. Your advisory packet is ready. No fanfare. No press release. No announcement. Just a quiet summons. When I arrived at the Rinwald and Chase building this time, the guard didn't ask for my name. He just nodded, handed me a security badge without a guest label, and opened the side panel with his keycard. Same private elevator. Same brushed steel walls. But the ride felt different. Last time, I'd gone up with suspicion. Curiosity. The slow, electric burn of retribution blooming beneath my skin. This time, I stood in silence and caught my reflection in the metal. Not triumphant. Not smug. Just steady. Unmoved. I had nothing to prove. Nothing left to chase. I'd been underestimated, replaced, and discarded, only to return not with fury, but with presence. That rare, irreversible thing that only exists after you've survived the collapse and chosen not to scream. When the doors opened, Eleanor was already waiting. She didn't extend her hand this time. Didn't need to. "Mr. Dawson," she said with the barest incline of her head, "welcome back." She led me through the glass hallway, past rooms full of people who now knew exactly who I was, whether they said it or not. I saw it in the pause of glances, the subtle shift of body language. Not fear. Not awe. Recognition. We stopped at the end of the corridor. 1 door. Frosted glass. No nameplate yet. Eleanor opened it. Inside, a desk, minimal. Wall-to-wall shelves, empty. A leather chair, high-backed. Windows overlooking the skyline. Elegant, not flashy. The space had that freshly scrubbed smell of preparation. No legacy. No ghost of the one who sat here before. It was waiting. She turned to me. "Think you're ready to step in?" I looked around once, slowly. Took it in. The silence. The wait. I nodded. "I'm not here to replace him," I said quietly. "I'm here to build something that lasts longer than vanity." Eleanor didn't smile. She just responded, That's why we asked. She left me there. No instructions. No onboarding. Just the room. The view. The seat. I stood for a while before sitting. The chair was firm. No squeak. No looseness. It felt earned. I thought of Lauren. Of the man she thought she was choosing. Of the job title, the leased car, the bottle service nights passed off as progress. She had traded something solid for something shiny. She walked out thinking she was walking up. But power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It waits. Quietly. Patiently. Until the room turns. And when it does, it doesn't knock. It opens a door. And you're either standing there holding the handle, or you're locked out forever.